everyone. Welcome to the third day of International Planning and Architecture Conclave iPac, an academic event hosted by Sushant School of Art and Architecture. The event is a much-awaited week-long carnival of exhibitions, installations, discussions, workshops, and lectures. I extend a warm welcome to all our dignitaries, invited guests, colleagues, and students. The theme of iPac this year is the third eye. What does it mean to be able to see beyond the physical? What is the mind's eye? According to various dharmic traditions, the third eye represents a way of seeing with and through intuition. Sometimes referred to as the inner eye, it speaks of peripheral vision or gut feeling leading to what is called metafocus. Here is a field where the creative blurs edges and forms, where focus doesn't necessarily mean a sharper vision, but a process that allows the bindu to be revealed as the point of both. This is the beginning and end of all, a form of prayer, inner reflection, leading to insights contested steadied by an unquestioning faith in the life force, where the Madhya Bindu is the courtyard which allows the sky to penetrate through the built mass, out of which a silence emerges. iPac 2019 program linking architecture, planning, and design is structured to mirror the dance of this life force through its cycle of creation, preservation, and destruction, and rebirth. I'm also extremely ecstatic to introduce the series of events that would take place throughout the day. The day begins with a talk by Dr. Anuradha Chatterjee on gender sensitization, titled Don't Put Her in Her Place. It'll be then followed by a talk on draftsmanship by Professor Anand Bhatt. Afterwards, Professor Roger Connor is going to speak on retention deficit disorder. Moving on, we'll have the opening of the exhibition titled Calligraphism by Honorable Trustee Sheetal Ansal. We then break for lunch. Post-lunch, we have an interesting panel themed Archive Today, comprising Kaivan Mehta, Khushbu Kalyanwala, and Vandana Sinha, moderated by one of our faculties, Tapasya Samal. Then we have a talk by Shailaja Vora and Sanjay Sharma on interiors with art. We break for tea at around 4 o'clock. The parallel events for the day is obviously a design charrette, which is a continuation of a talk by Dr. Anuradha Chatterjee. We have an all-day parallel session, which is the basics of cinematography. It's an alumni workshop by Prayas Gupta. We have an all-day design charrette of 4th years, run by Gregory Burgess. And we are also running SSA Factor, a workshop by Peter Scriver, Kaivan Mehta, and our senior professor, Bhavna Randona. I request Simran Raswant to introduce our first guest speaker, Dr. Anuradha Chatterjee, to our audience.
A very good morning to everyone present here today. We would like to extend a very warm welcome to Dr. Anuradha Chatterjee, Dean Academics, Avni Institute of Design at Calicut. She completed her professional degree in architecture from TVV School of Habitat Studies, New Delhi. She holds a master's degree in history and theory and a PhD from the University of New South Wales, Australia. She has taught in India, China, and Australia for the past 17 years. She is the author of 3 books, John Ruskin and the Fabric of Architecture, Built, Unbuilt, and Imagined Sydney, and Surface and Deep Histories. Dr. Chatterjee is the area editor for Southeast Asia for Bloomsbury Encyclopedia of Women in Architecture, as well as companion to the Guild of St. George, member of the editorial board Cambridge Scholars Publishing, also a regional editor for Asia Pacific for Taylor and Francis Journal for Textile Cloth and Culture, and a senior research fellow at the University of Queensland. I would now request Tripureshi to present a memento to our honorable guest speaker. We would now request Dr. Chatterjee to come up on the dais for her talk, Don't Put Her in Her Place.
Slight change. Is it on? I'll just test. So I should point it that side. Is it better for them to change it or for me to change it? I think it's probably better. Okay, now she said she can change it. Let me try it. Works. I'll do it. If there's a problem, I'll ask you. Good morning, everyone. All the students are here who are taking part in the charrette. Can you have a show of hands of the students who are taking part in the charrette? Well, that's amazing. Thank you for joining us, and thank you for joining the charrette. So this is not strictly a talk. This is not strictly a talk in the sense, I don't believe I have the answers to a lot of questions that I'd be raising today. So let's treat this talk as more of a foundation and as a context setting for the charrette that we're going to undertake over the next 1.5 days. So the idea of putting her in her place is something you've heard, sort of this phrase being misused. If you ever put in these phrases, put her in her place, or putting her in her place, hashtag in Twitter, you'd be very surprised and very disturbed by the kind of content that shows up. And it's amazing that this kind of abusive content is still out there. And just to see what men, what they are tagging, what photographs they're taking, and what they're tagging as hashtag put her in her place. So, when I saw these images and I saw these sorts of posts, I thought, this is really interesting, is that, a woman should be in her place. And, being from Delhi, I think we really identify, and I've grown up in Delhi, so I'm a Delhiite, I was born here. Whether it's in her place, in terms of a social hierarchy or a domestic hierarchy or a hierarchy in an institution or in the city, I think this is something that we want to challenge as part of the charrette. So therefore it's titled, Putting Her in Her Place Not. So it's hard to sort of look at the screen and sort of handheld microphone as well.
Hello.
Is it okay? Is this okay? Yeah. So the talk is going to discuss the patriarchal foundations of women's space and sexuality. I'm arguing, and the talk will argue, that acts of violence, physical, emotional, and sexual violence against women, in a public space, are also acts of spatial violence. So it's an act of putting women back in the space they're meant to be in. So there's a kind of a norm about where women should be spatially. So space is a means through which women are domesticated, who are then punished, and women who exceed these domestic confinements are then punished and disciplined through violence. So violence is not just it's not just a systemic issue. It's an issue that it's a tool through which women are domesticated or punished if they are exceeding that confinement, really. The premise of confinement also means that women are expected to appear in and act in public spaces in a gender-appropriate manner. How many times, and again, you know, women in Delhi understand this point quite clearly, right? Why did you wear those clothes and why did you go there at night? You know it was dark, why did you go out? Right? We challenge these things now, but you know, 10 years ago we were told that. I grew up in this city, I know this, right? Most of you girls, can you maybe just put up your hand if you've heard this before, you know? Wear the right clothes, yeah? Wear the right clothes, you know, don't wear short skirts when you're going out at night, that sort of stuff. So, you know, gender appropriate manner. So that you should be, when you're allowed to be in the public space, you should act appropriately. You should behave accordingly. You shouldn't attract attention to yourself. So it should be appropriate. So we're questioning all of this. I'm only stating to you what norms are, and the whole point of the charrette is to kind of challenge that. One important point is that while it's natural for men to loiter or to sleep in the open, how many times would you walk around, even in Gurgaon and Delhi and all, you know, men are kind of like lounging in the open under the tree, you know? Women wouldn't do that. Women don't do that. I've never done that. I still don't feel safe doing that. Even if the environment is super safe, I'll be like, oh, you know, if there's a mobile phone, I need to have my mobile phone even if I'm doing that. So it's, you know, so it's a totally different experience, you know, public space. So when we talk about publicness of a public space, is a totally different experience for women. So when we design public spaces, we are designing for both genders and I think experiences of both genders. And like I said, the publicness of a public space is a totally different experience, which is shaped by, again, patriarchal structuring of gendered relations across private and public spaces. So the talk is going to look at some of these ideas. So it's meant to be a provocation. It's not meant to prescribe ways forward. It's not meant to provide answers to, but it's meant to set the context, and hopefully it will inspire you to kind of, you know, take this forward. And really the future is in your hands. We don't really have answers to what the future of the city or what the future of the public space in this country or in any other country is. It's really in your hands. So the point is to unsettle perceptions, which is what the charrette is hoping to do. You know, when you say, you know, Delhi, women's safety, just the keywords, you know, the images that come up in Google, you know, this is the easiest thing to do, is just to work out what kind of images are there, and I think they're quite relatable, you know. Just a, you know, pretty scary, pretty confronting sort of a landscape. So I'll look at one of the texts I'm looking at is this article by Christine Hudson, and definitely she says, empty or no man's land between uses, badly lit streets, parks, underpasses, advertising, and other forms of street decoration that sexualize the urban room creates places where women feel unwelcome, excluded, ill at ease, or insecure. So she's also referring to these sorts of ads, you know, you want it. So this kind of sexualization of the public space is also something that, you know, we sort of kind of glide over, we kind of look at every day, we've kind of gotten desensitized to it. We've gotten desensitized to the fact that you know, as women, our bodies are being objectified, that we're expected to, you know, aspire to being objectified. But the point is, you know, ads like this do, in fact, have an impact on the way, I don't know, women are perceived in the city. So there are a lot of interventions like Safe City and a few other, which, you know, look at this idea of sort of mapping sort of attacks on women or threats to women. And I think they're really good. So if you look at this website, safecity.in, you know, there are sort of incidents. So you can see there's stalking 9,715. So I mean, it's really good. There's this kind of a citizen level, you know, citizen activism that sort of documents and maps these sorts of incidents, which is really good to get in terms of, well, how do you make spaces safe? Safety Pin is another one, apps that keep you safe. Have any of you used it? Just so I know, has anybody used it before? Were you aware of it? Well, it'll be interesting to see if you maybe download it even for the charrette and just try to get an experience of what that feels like to use an app like this, right? But you know what, Christine Hudson is also interesting because she says that fear cannot be designed away. Fear cannot be designed away. So you can put street lighting or building footbridges instead of tunnels, but they don't solve the root causes of women's fear in public spaces. So I think it is important to make spaces safe, I think, for everyone, for children and for the elderly and for women and for men. But I don't think it's just an issue of putting street lights and surveillance and all of that. I just don't think I don't want to be part of a future where I even want to think of safety as an issue. I'm going at that level. So I'm hoping the charrette, as students who are going to be shaping our futures and our cities, you take it to completely beyond the existing paradigm, which is safety. I'm saying think beyond safety. Safety, we want a world where safety is not even a concern, where it's not even an issue. We don't even want to think about putting streetlights. It's not an issue. This is what we want to achieve, right? So transgressing alternatives of thinking of the constructions on women and men in the city. This is what we really want. Because certain ways of being are enabled or facilitated while others are constrained or prevented. Social rules and expectations are internalized in order to ensure social conformity. Thus we accept certain ways of organizing and structuring the city as natural and as neutral processes, and in this way the gendered power relations remain hidden. So I think it's really about trying to understand what ways of being in the city are possible and available to women. And it is not just a matter of making things safe, but it's also about gender identity. So it's not just about designing, and it's not just a design task, but it's also about reinventing social relations, reinventing gender identity. So this is a really interesting book. I'm still trying to get a copy of it. Shilpa Phadke, Rana De's, and Khan's Women and Risk on Mumbai Streets. So they talk about loitering. And so they sort of looking at feminist utopias of the city and in the city that, how often, we always go between point A and point B. We go when we are very, very task orientated. We're not pleasure driven. So they're proposing an alternative where just hanging out, because to hang out for the sake of hanging out, because you have the ownership of the space. So that's one of the spatial utopias they're proposing. They said most debates on public space are disproportionately focused on danger rather than pleasure. Pleasure or fun is seen as threatening because it fundamentally questions the idea that women's presence in public space is acceptable only when they have a purpose. So women who are I think you relate to that. Especially younger women. You can go to college but come back. So it's conditional. Your movement to and fro from a public space is totally conditional. It has to be purpose-driven. What were you doing? Just hanging out on the street, having a drink or having a Coke, doing what? Just people watching. You don't do that. No one does that. That's not a sanctioned, I don't know, I didn't. Maybe you do. But it's not a sanctioned mode of behavior, and it's not a sanctioned behavior that is available to women to just loiter. So the radical shift from the politics of safety to a politics of pleasure demands that we examine what it means for women to have fun in public spaces and to interrogate the restrictive and often repressive ideas around women's safety that make such a conversation undesirable, if not impossible. So the point about restrictions and the point about being pleasure-driven and not just being purpose-driven is that you're not. So there's a lot of discourse on safety and security for women, which is driven around, women have to earn money and they have to care. So it's very, very goal-driven. It's not because they want to be out, and it's totally purpose-driven. Whereas for men, just to be in the public space is it's already taken for granted. So just something we can think of, I think. How do you structure different ways of being in a space as well? So streets are spaces. So continuing this discourse, Shilpa Phadke is saying that streets are spaces where people make claims. So streets are also spaces where these claims are shot down. But how might we imagine a street utopia? So a street as a public space is a totally, is a very contested space where, you know, you say this is mine, this is mine. And this is a class battle, it's a gender battle, you know, it's an age battle. So it's a battleground really, and it's a contested space. So how might we imagine a street utopia? So she says that if we were to construct a public space as more generally unfriendly, not friendly, but as unfriendly, and a space to be negotiated rather welcomed into, right? Would competing claims to public space look different? So if we claim not the right to safe public space, but the right to negotiate violence in public space in the same way that we do in other spaces. So I think it's an interesting proposition. Let's think it through. I mean, I haven't thought of the consequences fully, but I mean, I think it's an interesting proposition that you're saying that it's not a space, a public space is always going to be contested. It's always going to be fraught with difficulty. It's always going to be fraught with tension. But it's never going to be like, yeah, let's all coexist and happily and hold hands and skip. You know, it's never going to be like that. So it's about how do you negotiate and how do you make a claim for yourself. And that's what we're hoping that the charrette is going to do, is how do you imagine these sorts of negotiations to happen, right? Where you articulate a claim to the space for yourself, right? It will never be given to you, right? It's never going to be gifted to you, right? Are the students with me still? Are they kind of lost? I was flying over your head a little bit. It's early in the morning. Huh? Are you all with me? Yeah. So it's really about trying to understand how we might go about design, you know, sort of negotiating our approach to designing public spaces, really. So why loiter? This is a really interesting site, which I might not get into, but it's something that is in part of your brief that you should look at. Is, strategic loitering. You know, how do you, these are kind of, it's a kind of a performative act. You know, sort of re-articulating a claim to the space is a kind of a performative act, and occupying the space totally differently. Again, you can go through this. So, again, these sorts of images are fairly straightforward, right? I mean, you see a man kind of lying there, or, he's kind of relaxing outside in the open, under a tree, on the roundabout, on the grass, and this is a very interesting activist organization called Blank Noise, which is run by Jasmine Patheja. She's also a faculty member in Srishti in Bangalore, and this is a very interesting project that look at different issues around women and public safety and women and safety. So Meet to Sleep is an Action Heroes, and that's I just wanted to go to the website at this point, if that's okay, Meenakshi. So just look at just this website here, Blank Noise, Meet to Sleep 2016. You just have to hit escape and escape. You just have to exit the... Oh. That's all meant to look at that. Yeah, Chrome? Chrome? really. This is not. If you scroll down, can you see some images? If you just scroll down. Sorry, guys, this is technical issues. Always is. There's no presentation that's possible or perfect without a technical issue, really. Or if you want, you could look at it on your phones as well. Meet to Sleep, I think that should just show up. You download it now. It'll take time, no? Huh? Yeah, I think we can just go back to the presentation, huh? We can look at it in the charrette also, huh? So there's a few of these sort of meetup groups where women meet to sleep in the public, and I think it's a brilliant idea, to having a public sleep out, you know, and just to say, well, actually, you know, we can, you know. This is another one. Was it? I think I was at the airport yesterday. I said Calicut. I think I definitely heard that the women's toilet was very nice and clean, super clean, you know. But I think there was a room, unmarked room. It's not the dedicated breastfeeding space, but I think, you know, I definitely heard and think, oh, I can't, tinted glass, unmarked. And I could hear, you know, like there's a mother and an infant, and it's inside the toilet. I thought, oh, this is really interesting. And I thought, you know, before then, this is a really interesting sort of a Facebook series. I should feed my baby where? Again, you know, this idea is about public, private. That, you know, breastfeeding is a private activity. Even having lunch is not. So these are sorts of things that you need to kind of start to think about and start to challenge, and not again from a Western point of view. I mean, I'm not saying that, you know, there are some certain cultural norms and cultural traditions, that ways of being very comfortable with, but at the same time, let's reinvent that, and let's not restrict ourselves. And at the same time, let's not completely follow what people in the West are doing. So, but this I think is interesting, saying, you know, there's a combination of, oh, you know, I should feed my baby where. It's a pretty major issue in Australia as well, you know, where I think a few of the mothers have been asked to kind of leave the swimming pool area and say, you know, you can't really breastfeed your child in public, even though it's a totally, you know, it's considered to be a private thing. Happens in India as well. Urban Girls Movement, interesting. If you build and plan city for girls, it will work for everyone. Urban Girls Movement is an initiative by an independent Swedish think tank, but it's again very focused on safety. You know, just how to keep women, how to keep girls safe. I just think it's not enough. You know, for me, I don't think it's enough to say, I kept you safe. Thanks. What am I supposed to say? Thank you? So, you know, I feel a bit irritated. I feel a bit indignant about the fact that my peers are trying to keep me safe. Amazing. Thank you. I think, interestingly, this also is a really interesting article that I've included in your reading material, is How to Raise a Feminist Son. Which is, and one of the clauses there is never use girl as an insult. You know, crying like a girl, showing like a girl, playing like a girl. You know, I think part of a feminist spatial utopia is also how to raise boys and how to raise men, right? And again, this is a very interesting article that talks about the different ways in which you might counter something like this. You know, it's not enough to design a city that is safe for girls, but it's also important to raise boys in a feminist manner, to raise feminist men, feminist boys, young men. Gender identity, things like, you know, strength, and women. Women are supposed to have emotional strength, but not physical strength. It's not totally even true. And a lot of, I mean, I know this is a bit kind of, you know, it's very unfeminine to be a weightlifter and to be a bodybuilder. You know, kind of defies the sort of, at least the heteronormative, you know, gender identity that, you know, we're supposed to be at a certain body mass index and all of that, right? No one defines what it means to be a woman besides a woman herself. So I think definitions or self-determined definitions, I think, are important. So just looking at some of these ideas on what it means to develop your body differently, you know. So there's a woman who is saying, I've developed a deeper respect of how powerful or inspiring and enduring my female body truly is. It taught me that I'm a smart woman, I'm a strong woman, beautiful woman. So again, going beyond the heteronormative idea of what a woman, what a feminine identity, which is, it's everything, isn't it? It's your body, it's how you feel in your body, it's how you feel in your body in a public space, and it's sort of everything. It's not really, it's not, one thing is not away from the other. And it kind of took me back again, the reason I come back to some of these is because my undergraduate thesis, it kind of always takes me back. It's this point of, and interestingly, Poonam is here, Poonam Prakash, who's one of the expert advisors, and she was my thesis guide. So it's a really interesting full circle back that we are here today, and she's an invited guest. She's come here, and these are some of the issues we looked at, is looking beyond the public-private dichotomy. What if we domesticate the public realm? And what if we really challenge to what is private and what is public? What happens then? What's at stake? Who is to sort of not benefit from this? So the design charrette is meant to look at, I don't know if I'm blocking it, new utopian futures of what women are able to do and be in a public space. This is your task. Challenge the dichotomy between public and private space. Reconceptualize public realm. Imagine if women designed cities instead of men, how would they design it differently? Right? New spatial utopias, new ways of claiming ownership of public spaces. Redesign of an infrastructure or a bus, street, or park. New ways of occupying and using infrastructure. How do you use a train? How do you act inside a bus? Different ways of occupying and different ways of being inside these spaces. New designing and planning approaches. So it's not simply a matter, like I started with this initial premise, you can't simply design out violence. I suppose you can. I suppose you can make a city totally violence-free, but the point is that we're trying to look at the entire point about gender identity completely differently. It's about challenging the proper place of women in society, in a city, in a family, right? In an institution. And it's about identity. It's not just about designing out to violence. It involves challenging existing social relationships. Yeah, in social relationships in the sense, your relationship to your father, your relationship to your mother, your relationship to your brother, to your colleagues, to your bosses, to your employers, to your employees, everyone, right? So I'm saying that you'd have to reimagine how, these different alternative social relationships, right? And this is a really interesting book again, which I've included in the larger reading kit, which we haven't released, and we are going to release it today because it's about 400 pages long. But this book is included as part of that kit, and I think there's some interesting ways and interesting alternatives that Brodsky sort of includes in this book. One of that is envisioning a world without street harassment. Then, I can't even read that. Raising Generation E for empathy. Let him wear a tutu. What will children play with in utopia? And this whole chapter is on how do we, if the world is a mirror, and if women, from childhood, we're used to looking at the mirror and saying, am I good enough? There's always a self-reflective, that our reflection has to be perfect. What if, and the mirror is also a kind of a simulated male gaze, that we are trying to perfect ourselves in the image of how a man wants to see us, or that we imagine men or man wants to see us, or society wants to see us. What if the mirror was gone? What if children didn't have mirrors to play with? What would they play with then? The day without body shame, how do you remove that? That would be a utopian world, right? A day without body shame. I'm not too dark, I'm not too heavy, I'm not too light. It's just, I'm good as I am. So how do you design a world without body shame? So it's all of these things are really important part of. So these are just examples of the kind of outputs that so when I say post-star, it has to be kind of totally visionary. Like it doesn't have to be, you don't have to have programmatic requirements. What we want is a big, punchy statement on your vision of how you want to see how you want to reimagine the city, and it just has to come out in a super punchy way. So that's kind of this infographic, more sort of graphic, less text, but it should really capture what you want us to see. So that's basically the premise of the charrette, is that we want you to look really at, as I said in the email, it doesn't have to be, it's not really a redesign of a space, so that's why it's sightless. I've deliberately kept it sightless, and I know that's really hard, but so you can reimagine a space. Like I said, you could reimagine a gym, you could reimagine a bar, you could reimagine a retail store, you know, how it's designed, or a library, or you could reimagine a city. So it's an open palette, and it's totally in your hands. So I'll look forward to working with you then.
Thank you, Dr. Anuradha, for sharing your views with us. The floor is now open for questions. Anybody for questions?
I think it's good to have questions. I probably won't have
good
answers.
morning, ma'am.
Yes, yes.
Ma'am, like you said, we can still take care of the future generations by trying to raise feminist sons, like you said. But what about the current generation? How do we try to change the mindset of the current generation, of the current men who are roaming around in the street? Like tomorrow, if my bra strap is showing, that's a big no-no. But if some guy is just roaming around in his vest, it's completely okay. So how do you think we can change the mindset of the current generation? Because my thesis is somewhat related to this. I am basically designing a space in which men are uncomfortable. Because to at least start with the idea of uplifting women, some men are going to be, uncomfortable or challenged by the fact that what the hell is happening. So how do you draw the line between, like, is it okay for them to be uncomfortable? And is it okay for us to be in this state, or like, I don't know.
Yeah, I don't think I'm so worried about men being uncomfortable, to be perfectly honest.
Yeah.
Sorry.
No, but that's my thesis topic. So now if I come across a sexist juror, then I'm screwed.
I hope you come across a sexist juror, because then it makes your presentation really worth it. If it is easy, it shouldn't be so easy. The jury shouldn't be easy.
And ma'am, do you think that
I had an all-male jury for my reviewers. My guide is a woman, but the jurors were all men. And they questioned me on things like, iska area kitna hai, uska area kitna hai, because they're trying to see, if I had messed up my area statement. So, answering the question about current and future is you take on an activist and a hard activist role stance if you have to. But that's not what we want to do for the future. That's why that's why we want to bring in more systemic changes from here on, I think. But your question is completely valid.
But then that's like telling us that, in order to feel safe, you need to be isolated, or you need to be abandoned, or you need to be away from them. So, how do you make, can you do things to a public space that can control the male to female ratio? Can you design, architecturally or function-wise, can you do things that say that, only one guy can enter if there are like 3 people, so one guy can enter if there are 2 women inside. So, can you try to maintain the male to female ratio?
So that's a bit of social engineering that happens already, right? The women-only coaches, Segregation probably puts women more comfortable, but again, it's not something we want to encourage. It's segregation, safety based on segregation. So we don't want to promote that. So but I can understand that India is a democratic, totally diverse country, and it's not just all upper middle class. So it's a very, very diverse country. But social engineering, we don't. Don't mind the not meant to be inviting and welcoming, you know. But it's a democratic space. I think it's you know, so it's a matter of who makes a stronger claim and who's specific.
iPac at the School of Art and Architecture at the University. I would now like to hand over the dais to Prati, Dindal and Anandi.
Hello, guys, there is a request from our speaker. No video, no audio and no tagging anywhere. Thank you.